This video is sponsored by KiwiCo. Seriously fun and enriching science and art projects delivered directly to you. As the father of a 3-year-old, I couldn't have been happier than when I discovered KiwiCo. Their monthly boxes are full of hands-on projects and toys that are designed to expose kids to the concepts in STEAM. Their approach to teaching kids skills that allow them to be innovative and creative in order to become problem solvers who will one day change the world is something that I too feel extremely passionate about. I love putting these things together with my son, and he's always excited when a new box full of fun projects and toys arrives at our door. Each box contains everything you need, so no last-minute trips to the store for extra supplies, and the instructions are both detailed and kid-friendly. We just got the koala crate and put together our very own piece of stained glass art, which was just one of several projects in the crate. This one is specially designed for kids aged 2 to 4, and I don't need to tell you that we ended up with an absolute masterpiece. There's crates for all ages though, from age 0 to 104, so no matter how old the creative innovator in your life is, KiwiCo has something amazing for them. And now is the perfect time to try out KiwiCo for yourself. Infographic Show viewers get a special offer of 50% off their first month of any crate by going to kiwico.com/infographics. Get started with your own super fun project today. In 2021, on the International Space Station, thrusters suddenly fired as the result of a software glitch. It flipped backward about 540 degrees. A NASA flight director did something he'd never done before. He declared a spacecraft emergency. We'll come back to how things went down, but first, number 50. We'll give you some hard facts before we get into the stranger things about the International Space Station, which from now on we'll call by its abbreviated name, ISS. The first bit launched on November 20th, 1998. That was the Russian module called Zarya. Then came the US module, Unity. The space station is made up of several different modules, all serving a purpose that we'll get into today. All you need to know is that it's kind of like a high-tech space Lego, with different countries all doing their part to build it, take care of it, and use it. Those countries are Russia, the US, Canada, Japan, and various countries involved that belong to the European Space Agency. In 2011, NASA said it was completed. It became the first truly international space station. Number 49. All these parts make the ISS 357 feet in length, about 108 meters. It's about the size of a football field. American football, that is, although a soccer pitch is a similar size. Number 48. That great heap of a thing is currently orbiting around the Earth, around 250 miles away. It's moving pretty fast too, at around 17,500 miles per hour. At that speed, it can orbit the Earth every 90 minutes. Okay, but can you see it from down here? Number 47. Yes, you can, as long as you have clear skies. There are thousands of places on Earth from where you can easily spot the ISS. It's the third brightest object in the sky, and it's no big deal to get a glimpse. If you want to know where to look and when, NASA has a website called Spot the Station. NASA says it looks like a bright, fast-moving plane. Don't get too excited. No sooner than you see it, it's gone. Number 46. Folks didn't live in the ISS at the start. Astronauts first were sent there on November 2nd, 2000. They were 2 Russian dudes, Yuri Gidzenko and Sergei Kirkalev, and 1 American dude, Bill Shepard. After they laid down the home sweet home doormat, the ISS had people on it ever since. As for what they did first, it involved a lot of unpacking and assembling of critical things. They spent about 4 months in total unpacking and assembling, which could probably have earned them a fortune if they had their own unboxing YouTube channel. Let's now talk about life on the ISS, which is not always a bed of roses. Number 45. The last thing anyone needs up in space is everyone getting sick. It doesn't happen often for various reasons. Before astronauts go up there, they have to quarantine down here on Earth. That's sometimes called the Crew Health Stabilization Program. It can suck for the astronauts because they're in a kind of comfortable jail for 2 weeks. NASA said this before the last flight to the ISS. All of our crew must stay in quarantine for 2 weeks before they launch. This ensures that they aren't sick or incubating an illness when they get to the space station, and is called health stabilization. In quarantine, astronauts generally read a lot, exercise, and spend time using devices to have video chats with their families and friends. If they do come into contact with anyone, those people have to go get the green light from NASA flight surgeons. And that's all good, but has anyone been sick on the ISS? Number 44. Yes, they have. Astronauts have been known to get colds, respiratory infections, skin infections, and sometimes urinary tract infections. But how to deal with that up in space? Number 43. There might not be a doctor on the ISS, but all the astronauts will have had some basic medical training, and there are also basic medical supplies. Infections are generally just treated with antibiotics, so they aren't usually a problem. The bad news is bacterial infections are more deadly in space because of microgravity. Antibiotics don't work as well up there either. The good news is NASA has a bunch of medical experts down below who often talk to the astronauts about bruises, cuts, and if need be, a burning sensation when peeing. Also, there might be a crew surgeon up there. One former surgeon was asked what would happen if someone got a urinary tract infection on the ISS. He said a crew member with a UTI would be isolated in their sleep quarter while symptomatic and wear a mask for containment, have cultures done to identify the organism for appropriate treatment. We guess you now want to know where all the pee and poop go. Number 42. First of all, you need to understand something about zero gravity. If an astronaut were to leak in space as they do down here, the stuff would get everywhere. As for dropping the kids off at the pool, it could get messy. You don't want droplets getting into equipment or astronauts' mouths. Yuck. The original toilet on the ISS wasn't very convenient at all. Excuse the pun. Women had to pee standing up, and doing a number 2 meant getting strapped to the perimeter of the toilet and ensuring nothing could get out. According to reports, this was not ideal. In 2018, NASA spent a cool $23 million on a new kind of toilet. Astronauts now use a hose for peeing, and for pooping they drop the kids off into a vacuum. It's still tricky business, but there are all kinds of handrails, so astronauts don't slip and fire a jet of loose poop somewhere it's not meant to go. The toilet still looks like a toilet, with a seat and a bowl. But now with strong suctioning force, everything comes out of the orifices and into the hole without any problems. But where does it all go? Number 41. Water is heavy, right? You also need a lot of it for a bunch of astronauts over a period of months. And that's why pee gets recycled up there. There's a saying on the ISS which goes, today's coffee is tomorrow's coffee. Poop is a different beast, of course. Some of the poop might go back down to Earth to be tested, but seeing as the average astronaut will produce about 180 pounds in 1 year, you just can't bring all that poop home. Most of it goes into waste canisters, and when cargo ships are coming back, they let the canisters go. They're burned up during re-entry. If you had a telescope, you maybe could see this in action. Although we doubt anyone has ever seen a poopierite. Number 40. There are 2 bathrooms on the ISS. In 2009, one of them broke down and a queue formed. Everyone had to pee over in the Russian module after that. Number 39. There's also 1 gym and 6 places for sleeping astronauts. The ISS is designed to hold 6 people, although more people have stayed on it. When astronauts are not working, they spend at least 2 hours exercising. Remember that with zero gravity, they're not using their muscles much. Over time, that could be bad for the astronaut, so they have to be strict about their exercise routine. Now you might want to know, how do they do that? Number 38. They need machines, of course. Right now, astronauts use a bicycle, a treadmill, and a specially designed weightlifting machine known as the ARED, aka the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device. All 3 of these machines are designed to give a person a full-body workout. They don't skip leg days. Obviously, lifting weights in zero gravity wouldn't be very hard at all, but the ARED machine is designed so that astronauts can do things like squats, deadlifts, and bench presses, and it'll work out the muscles just like the same exercises in the real world. As for the treadmill, cords strap them to it. They ride the bicycle in a similar way by being held to it. Number 37. The longest time in space by a U.S. astronaut is 342 consecutive days by Scott Kelly. The Russian astronaut Valery Polyakov spent 438 consecutive days back in the day on the Russian Mir space station. Number 36. From 2019, NASA's astronauts will be ferried to the ISS by the SpaceX Crew Dragon and Boeing CST-100 spacecraft instead of aboard the Russian Soyuz spacecraft. Number 35. In total, 244 astronauts, cosmonauts, and space tourists have been on the ISS. Number 34. There isn't really any difference between an astronaut and a cosmonaut. The former word comes from the Greek star sailor, and the latter from the Greek universe sailor. Cosmonauts are trained in Russia and astronauts elsewhere. Number 33. In 2001, U.S. entrepreneur Dennis Tito became the first space tourist on the ISS. He spent almost 8 days up there for the cost of around $20 million. When asked about the experience, he said, "The pencils started floating in the air, and I could see the blackness of space and the curvature of the Earth. I was euphoric. I mean, it was the greatest moment of my life to achieve a life objective, and I knew then that nothing could ever beat this." Number 32. The space station weighs in the region of 420,000 kilograms. That's about the weight of 320 cars or 70 large African elephants. Number 31. U.S. astronaut Peggy Whitson holds the U.S. record for most days in space, although not consecutive days. In 2017, that record was 665 days. The top 8 places all go to Russians, with Gennady Padalka coming in top with 878 days under his space belt. Number 30. The outside of the ISS needs to be fixed and added to and upgraded. That's why there have been 241 spacewalks in total. Number 29. They can be dangerous, but so far no one has ever died. Still, listen to this next story. Number 28. An Italian astronaut named Luca Parmitano almost drowned in space when he went on a spacewalk in 2013. His helmet went kaput. The ventilation system failed, and so water started filling the inside. This is how he explained it. It completely covered my eyes and nose. It was really hard to see. I couldn't hear anything. It was really hard to communicate. I couldn't breathe through my nose. I felt isolated, and when I tried to tell ground that I was having trouble finding my way, they couldn't hear me, and I couldn't hear them either. He then got back to the craft and was okay in the end. Number 27. On spacewalks, there are some zones that astronauts have to stay away from. Remember that they're outside a totally enclosed environment. A rip in their suit would cause a rather bad day. So the dangerous zones are the places where their suit could get torn. But what's the very worst thing that could happen? Number 26. The answer, of course, is just floating off into space. Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield said he doesn't expect this to happen, but it is his worst fear. It likely won't ever happen to anyone since astronauts are attached to an 85-foot braided steel tethering rope when they go on a spacewalk. But what if that somehow snapped? Number 25. They would likely still be okay. That's because they can press a button that will release a small joystick. This controls the jetpack that all spacewalkers wear. In the 1970s, there were no jetpacks. Back then, when two astronauts named Pete Conrad and Joe Kerwin were outside the Skylab space station, they came loose. Luckily for them, they could be pulled back in by the tether. Okay, but if the very worst thing happened. Number 24. If an astronaut's jetpack malfunctioned and the rope somehow snapped, well, nothing's gonna save that person. He or she would just float off, likely tumbling about a bit. The good news is there would be about 7.5 hours of air to breathe, and with any luck, the tumbling bit might calm down. The astronaut could just relax, sip on some cool water, and drift off. Then they'd choke to death. That's all a bit dark. Now let's talk about something nice. Number 23. Food. Glorious food. On the ISS menu, there are close to 200 items, although they're not always available all the time. Since they have to stay fit up there, astronauts don't survive on Doritos and alien-looking cheese dip. They usually eat at least 2,500 calories a day, and the food is nutritionally diverse. When they open a bag of dried food, they scan a barcode. This keeps track of what they eat. Number 22. Tortillas are a mainstay up there because they're easy to manipulate and they don't cause many crumbs. Crumbs on the ISS are a bit of a nightmare to clean up. According to NASA, crew members use them to make breakfast burritos, hamburgers, and even peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. That sounds okay, but remember there aren't any freezers or refrigerators for foodstuffs, so things are generally freeze-dried or thermostabilized so they don't go off. As for fruits and veg, because they spoil quickly, the crew eats them first. They then wait for a ship to come and hand over supplies. Number 21. In 2017, the ISS had its very first pizza party. We're now again going to explore something that again might seem a little childish, but as you'll see, it's serious business. Number 20. The question is, do astronauts ever get in a cosmic punch-up? Months together in a very tight space can't be easy. Let's imagine one day a Russian cosmonaut tells an American astronaut that Rocky IV was nothing but a vacuous exercise and anti-Russian propaganda designed to separate the ostensible goodies from the baddies and prolong the false narrative that the US is the world's unblemished protector. We couldn't find any instances of out-and-out punch-ups in space, but you only need to look at some diary entries from Russians to know astronauts are human, and yes, they can get annoyed with other astronauts. Cosmonaut Valery Rumin wrote in 1980, "All the necessary conditions to perpetrate a murder are met by locking two men in a cabin of 18 by 20 feet for 2 months." Another cosmonaut wrote, "Today was difficult. I don't think he and another guy, understand what's going on with us. We silently pass each other, feeling offended. We have to find some way to make things better." Do astronauts on the ISS get peeved at each other? We guess they do, but there are no stories of serious altercations up there. NASA actually has a training program to deal with cabin fever to stop that from happening. Still, as you'll see now, astronauts will suffer psychologically while in space for a few months. Number 19. A psychiatrist in the US who studies how being in space affects the mind said months in space will take its toll on most astronauts. He said there are breakdowns, I think, in people's ability to tolerate psychosocial stresses after the first couple months. What's fascinating is what he says about what he learned from Russian space diaries. He said after those first 2 months, issues will pop up. Astronauts might feel bugged about personal space. They might have a disagreement that leads to them ignoring each other. The psychiatrist said these issues could become progressively worse over time unless they're dealt with and recognized. In fact, in the past, Russians and Americans have expressed they felt isolated when the language mostly used wasn't theirs. Still, one space psychologist wrote, "The selection of astronauts tends to favor people who don't have major characterological issues or neurotic issues. They're screened out." A NASA psychologist, though, said the difficult environment will always lead to some psychological stress. He used the term ICE, which stands for an isolated and confined environment. To practice this, astronauts spend time in cabins together in the remotest parts of Canada. He said up in space, people tend to get on, but at times, they'll get a little bored of each other. He said there are more issues and tension when astronauts from various countries have to work together. His conclusion, expecting the astronauts to be perfect individuals and never have any tensions and never have any conflict, never have any negative feelings, is completely unrealistic. So yeah, while the videos we see back home show an environment that looks like the Walton family, astronauts no doubt fall out from time to time. Number 18. To get a good view of everything, astronauts can head to a module that has 6 windows. It's called a Cupola Observational Module. The very thick windows all have metal shutters in case micrometeorites or other debris come knocking. What would happen if the space station was hit by something? Number 17. Larger things in space are tracked by the Department of Defense. The department can't pick up smaller stuff, so there's always some concern about getting whacked. But when we say small, we mean something really small can cause quite a bit of damage. The European Space Agency explained that one chip in the window of the cupola was caused by possibly a paint flake or smaller metal fragment no bigger than a few thousandths of a millimeter across. Number 16. All the cables that connect the electrics on the ISS measure around 8 miles. Number 15. There are over 350,000 sensors up there, all to make sure the ISS and the crew remain safe. Number 14. Scott Kelly was asked what he did when he had free time on his hands. He said he used Twitter and occasionally watched Netflix. His 2 favorite shows were Better Call Saul and Game of Thrones. Number 13. Astronauts don't have direct internet. Instead, their connection is linked to NASA's communication system. If there was a punch-up after the Russian crowd all started shouting support for Rocky, it wouldn't be live-streamed on Facebook. Number 12. US astronauts also have a bunch of movies they can pick up from a library. Some of them include The Matrix, Moon, Blade Runner, Terminator 2, Armageddon, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Alien, Aliens, Alien Resurrection, and Rocky IV is not on the list. Now, you need to hear how they wash their clothes up there. Number 11. As you know, water is very precious on the ISS. There isn't enough to wash clothes, so astronauts have to wear the same clothes for quite a few days. Maybe that would put you off going into space, but former British astronaut Tim Peake explained why it's not all that bad. He said, "We live in temperature-controlled environments, so clothes don't get as dirty as they might on Earth. Some of the items, like socks or our exercise gear, sometimes have antibacterial materials in them too. Underwear is usually changed every 2 to 3 days, socks and t-shirts every week, but trousers and shorts will usually be worn for an entire month before they get ditched." As you'll now see, this isn't the worst part about living in space. Number 10. In a Q&A, Peake was asked, "What's the grossest thing about living in space?" He replied, "By far the grossest thing about living in space is watching the soles of your feet disintegrate during the first couple months in space. The reason is astronauts aren't using their feet up there, so the soles get very, very soft. The skin drops off, which is something astronauts have to be really careful about." He said you can become quite unpopular if you take off a sock quickly and let all the flakes of skin loose. Gross is fine, but what about something more dangerous? Number 9. A former NASA astronaut named Clayton Anderson said the 3 biggest dangers on the space station are number 1, fire, number 2, depressurization, and number 3, a toxic spill. Number 8. As for fire, the US module has CO2 fire extinguishers and the Russian side has soapy water ones. From what we can see, there hasn't been an accidental fire up there, although astronauts have done experiments with fires. Depressurization would also be a huge downer. If it ever happened, it would likely be the result of an impact with some space junk or a rock. If it were to happen, the astronauts would all group together, usually at the Russian service module. There, they would discuss a plan of action. Anderson explained, "By dividing the space station in half, we can quickly deduce which half is leaking, the Russian side or the US side. Once that's known, we continue methodically closing hatches but not locking until the leaking module is isolated. As for a toxic spill, as soon as someone smells something weird and fears one, they'll press the alarm. All astronauts will subsequently put on oxygen masks." Number 7. Nothing that crazy has happened up there. At the start, we mentioned a thruster going off due to a software glitch. It did cause a spin, but inside the space station, the astronauts didn't feel a thing. Still, tipping like that was certainly something to be concerned about. Number 6. NASA actually released a lengthy report by an ISS safety task force. We'll be honest with you, some of what we read was a little above our pay scale as non-rocket scientists. Here's what the report said are the main dangers: micrometeoroid and orbital debris penetration of the ISS pressure wall or other critical hardware, a catastrophic collision with the ISS by a visiting vehicle or robotic arm, an onboard fire that results in loss of crew life or the ISS vehicle, a toxic spill in the crew habitable volume, a catastrophic system failure. There was absolutely no mention of an alien facehugger bursting through a guy's stomach during mealtime. It seems NASA does not take an alien invasion of the ISS seriously at all. 119 pages and nothing about aliens. This next part is interesting though. Number 5. Imagine one of the astronauts received a command from ground control and they thought, that sounds a bit sketchy. NASA called this an errant command. For that reason, any command that could potentially lead to the loss of life has 2 stages. They are arm and fire. In fact, there are lots of safety protocols when it comes to commands. The ISS receives about 100,000 commands every year, and 99.95% of them have been accurate. Still, there has to be a backup for that very slight chance that a command is telling the crew to do the wrong thing. Number 4. We're really bugged that there was no talk about aliens in that report, but we did manage to find some alien chatter involving the ISS. In 2017, a report stated that Russia may have found extraterrestrial bacteria clinging to the ISS. A cosmonaut said at the time that the bacteria came from outer space and settled along the external surface. They're being studied so far, and it seems that they pose no danger. Years have now passed, and it seems the alien talk was just a storm in a teacup. The next question: do astronauts dream of electric sheep? Number 3. It seems they don't, but they often dream of weightlessness when they're on the ISS. According to NASA, they also suffer from space-related nightmares. Scott Kelly said for him, sleeping on the ISS was a figurative nightmare. Astronauts have to be inside a sleeping bag, and it's not easy to change position. There are no morning and no night, so they don't appreciate the end of the day as we do. There's also a constant humming noise, so it's like sleeping in a box of mechanical bees. Kelly said he always had a bad night's sleep, adding, "My dreams are sometimes space dreams and sometimes Earth dreams, and they are crazy." Now you'll see the lengths astronauts are prepared to go just to be clean. Number 2. One important thing you need to know before you endeavor to go into space is astronauts don't spit. They swallow when it comes to brushing their teeth. First, astronauts put some water in a bag. That bag can't just be let go, it has to be hooked onto the wall, otherwise it'll float off. Then they squeeze a tiny bit of water onto the brush's bristles by holding the brush above the bag. Next, they apply the paste. That paste goes back into the bag and is hooked to the wall. Brushing has to be done with the mouth closed as much as possible, otherwise the mess can go everywhere, including all over the person's face. When they're done, they swallow. Just so you know, the toothpaste is edible. As for washing, they usually use a wet towel with soap on it. After they've applied that, they can use another wet towel without soap to finish up. This is how they wash their entire body. As for their hair, they use a waterless shampoo. Number 1. This last one is short and sweet, but it's also the best way we can think to end the show. We imagine you've never asked yourself, what does space smell like? Turns out space does have a unique smell. Scott Kelly said it smells of burning metal. Chris Hadfield said of burnt steak and gunpowder. Don Pettit described the smell as being a rather pleasant, sweet metallic, a little bit like welding fumes. Space sounds awful, come to think of it. You should give it a miss. Now, you need to watch 3 men stuck in space when an oxygen tank exploded. This is how they survived. Or venture further afield with what is a white hole opposite of a black hole.